Hey friends, and welcome to Mom Talk Maryland. I'm your host, Claire Duarte, founder of the Columbia Mom, and this is your spot for real conversations, local love, and a whole lot of community. Whether you're folding laundry, running errands, or hiding in your car for some peace and quiet, let's dive in.
Fix it.
Oh my goodness. Well, today we have on the podcast Beth Levine, and I am so excited to have you here to learn more about your background. And I'm also kind of excited to nerd out about mom stuff and kind of all things communications and marketing. Yeah.
It's exciting to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Well, tell me a little bit more about your background. Again, I'm a sucker for an origin story. I love to know more about your work experience, and obviously you're a working mom, so tell us a bit more about that.
Well, I grew up in Iowa, so I'm a transplant Marylander. I came out here to work for my senator, my home state senator in the Capitol, so I was drawn to politics, I guess, from an early age, but and then I worked on Capitol Hill for almost 20 years.
Wow.
And lived through 9/11, was in the Capitol on 9/11, so which is really scary. We get through that every year, and my kids are always like, "Are you okay, Mom?" So they're very thoughtful about it.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And then I had my kids, realized that working on Capitol Hill is not great to be a mom and living in Columbia, Maryland.
No.
And I have a job. I work at KO Public Affairs now in Baltimore.
Yes.
So it's great. It's so fun, and it's really been kind of, a full circle. Working on Capitol Hill, which was a dream job, doing communications.
No doubt.
And being involved in all these really amazing things and seeing the work that really goes on, and the difference between what goes on behind the scenes and what you see on TV, and how those different things play out.
That's huge. So tell me more a little bit about the work that you've been doing at KO. And for those listening, again, I'm a transplant as far as my career goes, not in location. I'm probably using the wrong terminology here, but meaning that like marketing and comm and things like that has not been my studied education. It's kind of the job that I threw myself into and learned along the way. So I feel like I have no actual credibility when it comes to other than just me on my phone, right? So can you explain to us a little bit more about what that means and what the work that you do right now?
So I actually have a minor in biochemistry, my degree, but I was trying to help my dad on the farm be this amazing,
yes, that makes sense.
And when my advisor said to me one day, he's like, "Beth, I don't think this is for you." I was like, "Okay, here we go, journalism, it is."
Right. Isn't that funny?
So I have a degree in journalism, but I started out working for a chamber of commerce in Iowa before I moved out here.
Oh, okay.
And it's really, that's kind of got me started on the communications track, not just journalism per se, but learning how to communicate with different audiences and membership, things like that.
Yeah.
And then when I got out to work for my senator, it was really, that threw me full into the communications world.
Yeah.
And learning how to deal with the media and the press. And really a lot of what we do at KO is working with the media and learning how to communicate to different audiences, figuring out, who your audience is on a certain issue. But it's the perfect blend for me because it blends the politics and the communication, which are two of my things I love to do. And so that's what KO really is helpful for me pursuing my passions. And from a professional standpoint. But we really work on, issues that come up if somebody needs help explaining or talking to the grassroots about a certain issue, or helping motivate certain people, certain audiences to talk to their elected officials or explain how this might be good for them or their sibling or their child as they're as they're debating and looking at different legislation coming forward.
Right. Wow. You've handled some crisis comms at the highest level. How does that experience translate into the daily chaos of motherhood? I feel like there's a lot of good skills there.
I will say it's probably just having this calmness about you. You can't get into the craziness of it, because you're seen as the communicator. You're the, for instance, when I was on Capitol Hill, there were 2 people who could speak on behalf of the senator.
Yeah.
The senator and me.
Wow.
And so, you know, you have to be the go-to person,
Yes.
and that makes you have a calmness about you. You have to see the big picture. And I think with my kids and being a mom, it's kind of the same thing. You know, it's
pretty
like
amazing.
a very level-headedness. If you get too crazy, my kids are going to start acting like crazy. And so it's just that calmness and being able to see the bigger picture. I think is really the crisis comes. I mean, I can remember we dealt with a Capitol Hill or a Supreme Court nominee, numerous of ones. While I was on the Hill.
Right.
And that is a tremendous lesson in crisis communications, because every day it was a new crisis, because there's something new coming out about the nominee, and how do you deal with it, and who's your go-to person. But you have to just gather all the facts, gather all the evidence, just like you do with your kids when something's going wrong.
Right.
And talk to them, be level-headed, and just be like that sane room.
Oh my gosh.
Same voice in the room.
Right. Yeah. And remind me, how old are your kids?
My kids are 13 and 10.
Oh.
So this is my last year of elementary school.
Oh my goodness, it's probably bittersweet.
Yeah, I think we're all ready though.
Yeah, I was talking to another mom yesterday who had a 5th grader. She was like, we're not, because they love their elementary school. We're not ready to say goodbye. But they also have a middle schooler too, so they're kind of like right in that cusp.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So he'll be in freshman next year. So
wow. So then you're gonna have a new ballpark.
Yes,
wow.
A new ballpark.
Yes. Well, and I kind of love this blend of how we're talking about a little bit of motherhood, a little bit of like, we're not obviously talking about crisis case management, but just, this higher level communication piece, right? So how to stay calm when emotions are high, whether that's a breaking political story or a meltdown over toys and soccer practice, right? Like, how do you kind of manage all of that?
I think for me, I feel like my demeanor, I don't get too excited about things.
So you were born for this.
Lows. I don't have those.
Yeah.
And, trusting your gut is a big thing too, I think. And helping, whether it's, my boss or my client who I'm helping through a crisis, or my son, it's all just like communicating with them on their level. Like with my son, it's okay. What's he going to understand in this situation? He's acting all, nutso. And, and so what's the best way to communicate with him? And it's the same way with the client. Yeah. What's the best way for them to understand exactly what I'm trying to get across and what they need to get across? Yeah.
That's huge. Well, and what kinds of tips do you have for de-escalating conflict? I know that there's things like listening first, finding the right messaging, etc.
Yeah. I think listening is a really big one. You kind of nailed it more than anything.
That's just from my research. That's not from my expertise.
But if you think about it, okay, so if you're with your kid, you'll say, okay, maybe they got in trouble or at school or they have a friend problem. My first go-to is, okay, tell me your side of the story. And it's the same way with the client. So, tell me what really happened in this situation. So what made us get to this point? And give me the facts, give me the details, tell me everything you know. And that's what I tell my kids too. Tell me exactly what happened. Like, did you really hit her? Or did you say this mean thing to her? Right. And how did it all happen? What do you think happened? Why do they feel this way? So I really think listening to them, getting their point of view first and foremost, is the first step in the process for me, both with my kids and with the client even. Yeah.
So I think what I hear you saying is listening, gather facts, and kind of the part that goes sort of hand in hand with listening is like, I was going to say, like, making sure they feel heard. Yeah. Because I know that, like, and I think these skills when it comes to parenting, if we're talking from the parenting lens, right? There's different ways you're going to approach your kids depending on which age and developmental bracket they are, right?
Yeah.
Because obviously the older they are, they're going to have higher cognition and processing. Even though when we're de-escalating, we're not going to go right to high level, even if they are older, because we got to de-escalate first.
But even not just like their ages, but I think every kid is different.
Yeah. Exactly.
Like
yeah.
my son reacts very differently than one of his friends might,
Yeah.
or to a certain situation, and so just knowing like what are their pressure points. And
Yeah.
that's just learning from experience.
Right.
You know, I mean, I'm an old mom, so
You,
I have a lot of experience.
that's you were gonna say. You just have a lot of experience. That's right. Yeah.
But it really is just like figuring it out. You know, what makes them tick, and what's gonna help them in this certain situation, because every situation is different and every kid is different.
Right. No, it's so true. I mean, I was gonna say, like, I have a 5-year-old son, and those that have maybe been following along with my journey know that, like, he's, at 2.5, he was diagnosed with developmental delay, which is just, giant catch-all, right? Mm-hmm. But he just started kindergarten, but I feel like he's just now coming into this spot where his cognition is sort of catching up, that processing piece, he had a language delay, and while the language is sort of like caught up for the most part, it's the language processing, the language retrieval, and the expressive language, because that goes with the cognitive piece, right? So now we're seeing, so the ways that I'm going to de-escalate with my son and navigate that's going to be very different than with my daughter, who they're only a year apart. You know what I mean? So you're absolutely right. Like, every kid is different. Obviously, every client is different. I mean, I guess the quote-unquote playbook with clients is that no matter what, we're meeting them with professionality, and obviously I think always leading with facts, receipts,
absolutely,
blah blah blah.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's just kind of how it goes.
Okay, right. If you want to keep your client, keep your job, that's how you do it.
Right. So now a piece that I kind of love, that I'm really passionate about, that is what part of why I kind of started my platform, is kind of talking about building trust through storytelling, right? Like, that's something that I love to kind of dig up with other entrepreneurs, other business owners, things like that throughout the area. So kind of want to talk about how can you lean into telling an effective story and communicating that down. Like, I guess you start with one of your clients, whether it's, political figure or another business entity, because I think there's so many layers of messaging. Because I think, okay, here's the message. Now you got to, like, communicate that to I guess the fields that are going to be then pushing it out, right?
Yeah.
Like, how can you make sure your message is effectively received and dispersed?
I think storytelling is one of the hardest things anybody has to do.
Yeah.
Effectively,
right.
And some people are good at it and some people aren't. Even within our firm, I know who to go to say, okay, I need help with this message.
Yeah.
And it's really getting the right message first. Like, what's your goal? What do you want to do? Who is your audience? What's your goal? And then finding, like, that one nugget in somebody's story that you're trying to tell. So whether it's, for one of my clients, if I'm trying to communicate to, if it's a professional association, I'm trying to communicate to their membership, and we're talking about some bill that's happening in Annapolis, and I'll say, okay, so doctor, why is this important to you? Okay, so talking through it with somebody else, and then taking that story and making it bigger and broader and better that everybody can relate to then.
Yeah.
But that storytelling, like finding that nugget and what's really important to that will be important to everybody else too, and motivate them.
Yeah.
It's really one of the hardest things.
Sure.
Like, what is that one message that, I mean, you deal with it every day, I'm sure.
In a very different lens. But well, and actually, as hearing you talk and kind of say that, I was kind of thinking through, like, the way that my team, because obviously we create a lot of different pieces of content, primarily, Instagram, our website, like blog features, email newsletters, and obviously now the podcast. Again, they're all completely different forms, right? And actually, as you were saying that, and I was, like, thinking about this, and I was like, okay, I think I actually really love finding out to the story. I like finding that out, and then I guess what's unique about my page, I'm not obviously I am my brand, so I get to tell it the way I want to, but with obviously when we're working with our clients and our campaigns, like it's a collaborative process, right? Like I still want to make sure that I'm effectively describing the business, the service, that I'm capturing that correctly. Because yes, it's still going to be through my knowledge, my understanding, because obviously I'm trying to understand, the business entity, but then I'm also sharing it with my audience, right? So there's so many pieces to take into consideration, so many boxes to make sure you're checking. So I think when I can be in I feel like my creative space is the fun space, but it's kind of like up here. Maybe that's wrong because I guess your executive level is more higher level, but that's just way.
Hard about it.
I know, right? Exactly. But when I can be in that zone, I feel like those pieces can come more naturally to me. I think that naturally, being a business owner, the busier I get, the harder it is to kind of freely, I feel like, find and connect those pieces all the time when I want to. But that's why I have a team, and they can help, because then they can zoom out better when I can't, you know what I mean? And kind of be like, okay, this is the point, you know what I mean? And we do that a lot with like our evergreen pieces of content, since we do a mix of both of those. So yeah.
Well, and I find that these like ideas, it's that old adage, like the idea, the nugget or whatever it is comes to you in the shower, or this great idea.
Always.
But for me, finding that when that time is that I can really focus and think about these things, it's like late at night. So
I know.
Everybody kind of has their own
for
time
sure.
and space and place to make those creative moments happen.
I know. And I think for me too, I do a lot of my like video editing in the evenings when I'm kind of, again, because when the kids have gone down, I'm like catching up on emails and probably doing a little bit of Instagram content. But I feel like a lot of my ideas are definitely in the shower, but also when I'm driving, which the unfortunate part is that I can't write them down. I will try to write them down, because otherwise like then it's gone, because I'll think of all these different like real ideas and these video ideas, and then but just like they say, dreams, if you don't like write it down, it's kind of like gone. But I mean, I guess like the good thing is like, okay, like while I'm done, at least I'm like focused on the road, and I'm like I'm being present.
Yes.
But then I have to like force myself to like probably like write it down before I run inside. But chances are I'm getting there and running inside, so it's a hard balance to do. But yeah, I do agree. It is, because I think no matter what industry you're in, if you have some aspect of creativity there, you do kind of need to be able to get into the zone a little bit to help pull those things out. I know.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about, balancing a busy life from, a high stakes busy mom on Capitol Hill to now you're here in Columbia. Reflecting on how do you kind of manage both those big roles?
Yeah, it was hard. It's really hard. And I don't, I'm learning every day how to do it better. I just turned 50 this year. Yay! I made it. My kids are keeping me young. That's at least what I tell myself.
Yes.
But I think it's just a constant learning process. And my sister-in-law told me once, it was the best advice I'd ever had when my kids were younger, was that like everything is in a phase.
Yeah.
Just get through that phase. And there'll be something new.
Yeah.
But at least, there's always a light at the tunnel, like 2 weeks when they're little. And it was really true.
Yeah.
And so I kind of think of that now, and balancing things and getting just through like a day, or, something that my 10-year-old is going through, because she's 10 and she's a girl, and it's totally different than a 10-year-old boy.
Right.
And so I keep thinking, we just gotta get through this.
Yeah.
And how best do I help her get through this?
Right.
But it's hard. It's really hard. And finding time for yourself.
Yeah.
When you're busy. I did not do a very good job of that for a long time. And
No.
And now I try to do better. Like I try to go to bed at a decent time and do things that I want to do. It still doesn't happen. Really?
No, but I think as long as you're making like the effort, because daily and even weekly is challenging when you're a parent. You know what I mean? But just carving out some intentionality here and there is sometimes the best we can do, and that's okay.
Yeah.
It's not going to be perfect.
No, nothing is perfect.
No, but I do like your notion about talking kind of like framing it in like a season or a phase, and I think when my therapist said something like that to me too, she was like, because there's so many different stressors in life, like yes, it's kids, it's work, or sometimes money, it's finances, and sometimes because like all the things break at once. You know what I mean? Like I just had to get like 4 new tires last week. Naturally, right?
Right.
But it's it's not always like maybe this is a hard year. It's not always going to be this hard. And even if you say it like sometimes like an affirmation, not like a untruth. I know that sometimes those can feel like they're blurred together because sometimes you're saying affirmations to not wishing something to come true, but just kind of like putting that positivity into the universe.
Yes.
And I kind of think of I remember seeing this on TikTok a few years ago, but there was like something called like lucky girl syndrome, and I'm this is the tangent I talk about. We're gonna come back all the way around. We'll get there, but is like saying like I'm so lucky, everything works out for me. Like I don't know why, it just does. Kind of like something like that. And it started from these like young like teenagers or like college girls, and they would repeatedly say this to whether mentally out loud or writing it down. And they would just be like, oh my god. And then when things would happen, like they would kind of repeatedly, oh my god, like I can't believe it. Things are just working out, because it's like you're kind of like rewiring your brain to think that way when you can, no matter what modality, whether you're thinking it, you're saying it out loud, or writing it down, it's kind of like you are speaking it out into existence, and that's the information that your brain is also hearing and digesting, right? So bringing that back to motherhood, it doesn't need to be the I'm so lucky. It's the reframing, right? Because that's the same. What we are mentally saying and putting out, whether it's parenting, whether it's our job, right, is what we are also simultaneously digesting. So if we're saying this is hard, it's hard, of course it's going to be hard. Yeah. I say that in last week, I think everyone knows, last week was a very hard week for many reasons. And we're all guilty of saying this is hard, because it is. Yeah. But I did, and while it was hard for me to break out of that mode last week, on Monday I was like, I can't have another week like that, or I'm not going to like. So I was like, even if things are still hard, and even if I'm still stressed, I'm not going to let stress run me. And even if I need to, that means I just kind of need to live in that like sort of fluffy, aspirational, affirmational world, if that's kind of how we protect our peace, even though things might still be chaos down here. Like, I think that's okay to have a little delulu, a little delusion, if you may, because if that helps you protect your peace so we can keep operating, I do think that's important.
Yeah. Well, it's living in the moment too.
Yeah.
Just it's okay to go minute by minute, hour by hour, to get through and get to the next day and get to your lucky, and that's okay.
I like that. And I know it feels like such like a funny line to walk between that like affirmation delulu as we call it, and just trying to survive a little bit. But I do think I think when I remember one year, we the day we got home from, this was like 2 or 3 years ago, the day we got home from vacation, I started a little laundry and our washing machine started working. And of course it's a massive load of laundry, and so then we
heaps of it from
vacation from a week-long beach vacation. I have 2 little kids who are probably, I don't know, I'm guessing they were 2 or 3 or something like that. And so we were also getting ready to start like pre-K, and so now we have to pay for a new washer, and then I remember we had like 2 major car, like the cars didn't break, but there was like 2 like major like things that were like $1,500-$1,700 each in that same fall. You know what I mean? And then there was another thing like with the house, and this was all like before Christmas, and I was like, there can't be another thing. And I remember like in January feeling like, oh God, like it sucked, like walking into the holiday season and then walking out with even more, and I remember my therapist saying to me basically that's kind of same motion. She was like, you know what, like it's hard and it sucks, but she was like, it won't always be like that. And for some reason, just not that I'm saying that I practice that all the time, but like when I when I can hold
It's
on
hard.
to that, like I think like it does help because reframing is important, both for parenting and for work.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that. That's what we do all the time for work too.
Yes, you have to.
For a client or whomever you're working with is, if they're having an issue, how do you reframe it to make it a positive?
Yes. Well, exactly. That's
for them
huge.
and the public.
Right. So, kind of leaning into that, what have you learned about letting go of perfection, setting boundaries, and asking for help? Because I think both as a woman, of course, I know I struggle with that, but as a parent and in work, I think can be so challenging.
Yeah. I have big problems with that.
That's why I asked that one. I was like, let me see what Beth has to say about this.
Yeah, I'm the first to admit it. My poor husband, because I always think, like, he should know what to do.
Yeah.
He doesn't need me to tell him what to do. So, like, when I'm asking for it, when I need help, he should just know that I need help.
Yeah.
But he doesn't. Right. Because I keep it all inside and I don't say anything and then I blow up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's really something I'm working on a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
It helps from professionally because we have a team of people and they are so good at what they do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're amazing. And so I've learned, at least now, I can say, okay, Laura, you're the creative genius in this office. What do I do? Or what would you suggest? Or can you do it? Even whatever you think is best.
Right.
Or Steve is the messaging guru.
Yeah.
And he's the one who can come up with that nugget better than anybody I know. And if I'm struggling, I can always go to somebody and ask for help. And so knowing our team and their strengths and weaknesses is helpful to me in helping me understand that it's okay to go ask, and I don't have to deal with this client or this problem all by myself. But it is hard, and I really struggle because I'm an athlete. Yeah. I played basketball in college.
Amazing.
This is what you just worked hard and got things done and did it.
Right.
And so to ask for help is really, really hard for me.
Right. I know. And I think, like, I definitely don't consider myself a perfectionist whatsoever, but my mom is a 40-plus year career woman, very strong, Virgo woman, as I like to say, and so I feel like I was raised by one, and my husband is very type A, and so they're kind of both very of that ilk, so I feel like I'm surrounded by enough that I can get the flavorings, but I kind of reject at the same time. All that to being said, now that I'm with running my business, like, it's very different to be an employee versus kind of when you're running something and you're handling messaging and creating content. I still am, like, I'm not a perfectionist. I just have very high functioning anxiety. That's, I think that is the correct label for it. But when you're coming, because that's where I find that I get stuck a lot of times, is I'm thinking about when I say the shoulds, I mean, shoulds in more in the frame of work of, like, how should this sound? How should I get this across? That I know, like, what I want to say, I know what I'm trying to get out, but then I always sometimes, like, for instance, I get stuck on hooks. That's a massive and major point of the messaging.
In your world.
Right, exactly. And so I find myself getting stuck on that a lot. And then again, same thing, I have a team, but I sometimes struggle with knowing when, okay, I've clearly spent too long here. I need to not just, like, ask for help, but kind of like, how long do you find yourself stewing on something before you're like, okay, now how do you help break yourself out of whether you're stuck or trying to finish something to kind of pivot, and whether it's finalizing a draft or whatever, how do you kind of help move yourself along that?
Well, I spent almost 2 hours looking for something on the internet.
Only 2? That's actually right.
And I finally gave up.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'll just come back to it another day.
Yeah.
But I don't know how to know when enough is enough. I don't know. It's just a feeling, I guess.
It's just a feeling. I know.
Yeah.
Once 2 to 5 hours have gone by, we're like, okay.
And part of it, I think, is knowing that there's somewhere you can go to get help.
Yeah.
So I'm probably more likely to say enough is enough earlier if I know I can go somewhere else or go to someone else
right.
to say I need help or this is really, I'm struggling with this. So that, I think, knowing there's help out there
Yeah.
makes that an easier transition to
Right.
go from it's just me, I can do this, to
Yeah.
needing help.
Well, and I think actually I love how I can't take credit for all these questions that I've laid out here, but I'm like, that is kind of the perfect marriage into parenting too, because whether you're, again, doesn't matter if you're a working mom, stay-at-home mom, part-time mom, I've been every variation of that, you know. Technically, I'm still what we may call a stay-at-home mom. I just, because I have a remote business, you know, so it's just I'm running around all the time. Now they're in school a little bit more, so that helps, right? But it's that same thing of, you know, I know a lot of moms, and, you know, I myself felt like this many times too, of like feeling like we have to do it all. And whether sometimes it's not always about like asking your spouse for help, but just even others, you know, in general. And I think it's something that I feel like I struggle with it probably more with my job than I do personally, because I guess the unfortunate thing with me, I'm the oldest of 5 kids, and my poor siblings probably go to therapy because of me. I was very bossy, because I had 4 siblings. I'm like, you guys can hold it, you know, right? And so, you know, I quickly learned what delegating was from a very young age. I'm like, this is awesome. Like, y'all do this, right? So I feel like, you know, as a parent, I was just, and again, I came from a large family, very busy family. I knew that, like, and again, both my parents worked full time, so we came from an atmosphere of like, you know, I was raised by nannies, and we would carpool and do, you know, all of our activities. So like, you know, my parents had to rely on others, and I was constantly asking people for help and doing things like that. And again, you know, I had my army of siblings, so you know, I'm very used to that. But I know, like, you know, my husband is the opposite, right? And has this almost like fear of, like, you know, doesn't want to burden other people. And I've come to, you know, see there's merit on both sides, of course, right? But at the end of the day, it's just, you know, I feel like we work hard enough as moms that there's kind of a level of suffering I feel like that happens with that. And I just feel like, you know, again, I'm saying this super like, I'm like, you know, I'm like, we shouldn't have to, you know, like, you know, just ask for help. I say like it's super easy. I know it's not, because I've also been in that position in very different ways.
Well, and I think from a mom standpoint, asking for help, it's who do you have around you,
right?
Who is surrounding you that you feel right. comfortable enough, because it's very personal. Like when you're, especially as a mom, I think when you're asking for help, it's really it's personal, and you know. Are you failing as a mom by asking for help, which I think is a common theme if, you know, if you have to ask for it? And no, obviously not. Right. It's like this inner, like, I'm the mom. I should know what to do. I should know how to handle it. I should be able to do all this, that sort of thing. I mean, I even have trouble asking somebody to help with the ride to practice. Yeah. Because I'm like, I should be able to do this. Right. But sometimes it's not. And but having that circle of friends, and even, you know, teammates, parents of teammates in our situation, and everybody goes through the same thing. That's the other thing. But none of us feel like somebody else is going through it. You always feel like you're the only one shouldering this burden, but every single parent goes through the exact same thing.
It's so true. And one thing, like, I always feel like I'm almost like happy when my friends ask me to help them, or help them with their kids and things like that. I'm like, absolutely, I would. Like, you know, you're like, I'll basically treat you like next to kin. You know what I mean? Like, come on in. Like, you know, assuming I'm available, absolutely. You know what I mean? And like, we have some really good friends of ours who have some pretty intense work schedules every now and then. And you know, there's 2 times where they had to, like, hey, can, like, you help drive the kids to school, which obviously means, and because I know my husband has to leave for work by like 7, and so in order for him to leave for work means that he had to drop his kids off at our house at like 6:30, 6:45, and I'm like, the reality is, like, we're up, right? We're not up, you know what I mean? But I'm in my brain, I'm like, of course, like I don't. It's already yes before I've said it, you know. That's how I am. You know, and but I know, like, for some people if they're on the opposite side of that, feel, and I get it, because like, yeah, when it's my kids, like I would, it's hard, because I feel like I definitely don't want to burden somebody else, especially like at that early morning. My brain, like, but then, you know, it's funny, that morning, like, I mean, I'll tell you, by 7:30, I was like, I was holding my cup of coffee, and it's like Christmas morning, you're like, oh my gosh. But they're like best friends, like the four of them.
You would do it all over again.
I would absolutely. I do it every Friday, basically, because like in a funny way. I mean, yes, the house was like, but they play together the whole time. I made them clean up, you know, and they ate probably more than they would, because, you know what I mean. It's just, I mean, so, but I'm like, and there was also a lot of joy in that little bit of chaos circle. But yeah, I would do it all over again, and I would do that, you know. And I think we just have to remind ourselves that we are just as deserving of the compassion that I feel for getting to do that for my friend, and we are just as deserving for receiving that. Yeah.
But that's hard.
It's. I didn't say that these were all easy takeaways.
I mean, and I grew up just the opposite of you did. So I grew up on a farm in rural Iowa. I mean, it was just us. My mom, she did, you know, she taught aerobics in town and, you know, that sort of thing, but but she was always home. Yeah. And they were running the farm, my mom and my dad. And so they were always there, and it was just us. Yeah. You know, there's no other kids for miles. You trick or treat to like 5 houses who are their friends, and that's it. Yeah. You know? Yeah. It's just a totally different than growing up where you have this entire community of your family, you have a big family, and so you learn to just do things on your own and not ask for help because there was nobody there.
Very true. From such a different lens. But it's kind of interesting, unique, because even though you were completely raised that way, that was, you know, your experience, you're living a very different experience, because now you're like, oh, you're a transplant. You know, I don't know how much friends and family, I'm sure obviously you gained friends, but you know what I mean? You know, and you're a career woman, right? Like, obviously, but then that's still part of you, I'm sure, that's still inside of you, like, you know, oh, I gotta be that strong, you know, independent woman, independent mom. But you are in a role where you are dependent on support and help. What's that experience like?
It's different. And it's taken some figuring out, because, you know, a lot of times I could ask my mom, what would you do in this situation? Right. What did you do? And there's no correlation there to get advice from that standpoint. So you rely on other people and other things. My mother-in-law worked, so I'll ask her sometimes, but it's just different raising kids now too. There's so many different pressures that our kids have and that we have. I know. That weren't there when we were growing up. No.
That's a whole nother podcast.
Yes, you're right.
That's a whole nother podcast. I know. Well, Beth, as we wrap up here, it's been so fun. For anyone listening along, I hope you were able to follow along from all of our jump spots. We're talking about work and parenthood, and motherhood, really. But it was so wonderful to kind of like really, you know, talk through all these different lenses and all these different things that you juggle. You know, because I mean, I think it's super admirable, the work that you do, the work that you've done. You know, I feel like we'll definitely have to, you know, reconvene and talk more about, like, I need to nerd out more on the marketing comm side. Yes. Probably ask you for some help too. You know, it's funny, actually. So I mean, my mom is planning, I think, on retiring next year, but she is an accountant, but she's been with, I mean, they've now been rebought out a few times since, but a PR firm, and I interned there in college. I couldn't tell you, like, I remember, like, I was an intern in, like, the finance department, but they would pull me into the general intern pop, and they're all doing, like, the PR projects, and my brain was like, what?
And now you're living it.
I was like, oh, but it's still very different than actual, like, that scope of world, because those are massive clients, and I'm dealing with a very smaller niche in a smaller arena.
It's only time.
We'll see how that evolves. Well, any final tidbits that you have on being, again, a career working mom, especially in communications and kind of the political climate we are like?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I can say is just finding your spot in the world, whether it's, you know, communications or your mom, whatever, but finding that that place where you belong. You know, for me, I loved Capitol Hill, but if I wanted to be a mom, it just wasn't doable. And so I found an awesome spot in KO, and it gives me the flexibility I need to be able to come home and take somebody to baseball practice, and somebody to basketball practice, and somebody to dance, and sometimes I have to work at midnight, but that's okay because I get to do other things that are really, really important to me.
Right.
And I think finding those time for those important things, which at where I am is my kids, along with taking care of clients and doing things that are professionally satisfying to me, and help kind of itch a scratch
right.
that I have. But just finding that spot where you can do it all.
Yeah.
I mean, it may not be easy.
Right.
It's hard.
And it's gonna look a little different, right?
Yeah.
But I do think the point that you made there too about finding your passion and leaning. I mean, I kind of realized when I was, obviously I was a COVID mom, so that obviously burnt me out in its own way. But I remember feeling like, and at the time I was like, I just need to be a stay-at-home mom because I needed to eliminate all other stressors, because that burden was just too big and too much to manage, which would have been just as hard outside of COVID, but in that vacuum it was just too much. But I remember, and then as we're kind of slowly coming out of COVID, kids were getting bigger, a little bit more independent. I remember feeling like I was just feeling pulled, and I remember feeling like this, I wanted more and I needed to do more, and I felt like a better mom because I was happier, right? And some women, their calling is being a stay-at-home mom. And there's literally nothing wrong with that and sometimes I'm like, man, my life would be a lot simpler if I.
It would just be other stresses.
Other stresses, or that's
something too that I always tell my kids is that everybody has something going on in their lives. You have no idea what it is, so be patient and be kind. Because you don't know.
Listening. I mean, maybe that's just our biggest takeaway from today is just being, that's kind of how I've been reflecting on lots of like political events and things like that. Just remembering that we might not know the full story. But all we can do is be compassionate, empathetic listeners. And I think the other point we didn't say is kind of leaning into our very trusted source for factual information and going from there. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Beth. This was so wonderful to learn more about you, and looking forward to chatting with you further.
Yes, I would love that. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Mom Talk Maryland. If you loved it, leave a review, share it with a friend, or tag me at the.columbiamom on Instagram. I'd love to hear what you think. And don't forget to follow the show so you never miss an episode. Until next time, keep showing up, keep supporting local, and keep being the incredible mom, woman, human that you are.